She never planned to save anything that day, and that was what stayed with her later. How ordinary the moment had been, how small the choice seemed at first. The morning was gray and heavy, the kind that pressed down on her shoulders before she even stepped outside, and she moved through her routine, half awake, carrying a bag of trash toward the old bin near the road, thinking about nothing at all. The wind was sharp and bit through her sleeves, and she almost missed the sound, a faint scraping, something slow and uneven coming from beside the fence where people sometimes left what they did not want. She told herself it was a raccoon or a cat, and she would have kept walking if the sound had not stopped the instant. She turned her head. There was a box there, old and soaked through with melted frost, its edges warped and collapsing in on themselves, and something about the way it sat felt wrong, like it had been placed, not dropped. She stood still longer than she meant to, listening, waiting, and when the sound came again, it was softer, weaker, almost tired. She told herself to leave it. She had learned long ago not to touch what strangers abandon, but her feet moved anyway, carrying her closer until she was standing over it, her breath fogging the air. When she knelt, the ground was cold enough to sting through her jeans, and she hesitated, her hand hovering above the lid because some instincts take longer to silence than others. The box was warm, not the warmth of the sun, or decayed, but living warmth, pulsing faintly against her palm, and when she lifted the lid, the smell that rose was not rot or fur, but something sharper, metallic, almost like rain hitting stone. Inside were shapes tangled together, small, trembling, wrapped in rags that had once been clean, and as her eyes adjusted, she saw eyes looking back at her, too many, too bright, unblinking. They were not any animal she knew, their skin textured like stone and ash, their breaths shallow, uneven, and one of them shifted, weakly, making a sound that went straight through her chest. Fear came late and quietly, not as panic, but as a warning whisper telling her this was not meant for her. She closed the lid slowly and stood, her heart racing, telling herself to walk away, to call someone, anyone, but the box shuddered once, and the sound came again, thinner than before. That was when she understood that leaving would be a decision too, and she had never been good at pretending. She did not hear things that needed her. She picked up the box, and it was heavier than it should have been, and as she turned back toward her house, the wind died down, as if the world itself was holding its breath. She did not know what she was carrying, only that it was alive, and that knowledge shaped every step she took back to the house. The door closed behind her, with a sound that felt louder than it should have, and for a moment, she stood there, unsure where to put the box, as if choosing a place would make it real. She set it on the kitchen table, the same table where she ate her meals and paid her bills, and the normalcy of that space clashed with the quiet trembling coming from inside the box. Her hands shook when she opened it again, and the light revealed them more clearly. Now 3 small bodies curled together, their skin dark and uneven like cooling embers, their chests rising and falling too fast. One of them lifted its head and made a sound, not a cry, not a hiss, but something searching, and when its eyes met hers, she felt the strange certainty that it was aware of her, not just seeing but recognizing. She reached for a towel, warming it near the stove before wrapping them gently, her movements careful, the way she imagined a mother might move when she did not yet know the rules. They were hungry, that much was obvious, their mouths opening weakly as if remembering the idea of feeding more than the act itself. She tried water first, then milk, then softened bread. Each attempt met with confusion, until instinct guided her to something warmer, something closer to what they needed. As they fed, their bodies relaxed, and the harsh lines of them softened, and she felt relief rush through her, so strong, it left her lightheaded. She told herself again that she would call someone, that this was temporary, that she was only keeping them alive until help arrived. But as the hours passed, and the storm outside thickened, she stayed close, listening to their breaths, memorizing the sounds so she would know if something went wrong. They slept tangled together, and she stayed awake beside them, aware that the line between stranger and caretaker had already blurred by nightfall. The house felt different, fuller, heavier, as if it had accepted them before. She had, and somewhere deep beneath her worry, was a feeling she did not name, the sense that this was the moment everything else in her life would bend around. She pulled a chair close, and waited, knowing without fully understanding that whatever they were hers. Now the days that followed rearranged themselves around the quiet task of keeping them alive. She learned their rhythms quickly: when they slept, when they stirred, when hunger sharpened their movements, and she adjusted without thinking, as if her body already knew what to do. They grew faster than anything she had ever seen, not in sudden leaps, but in constant steady change that made each morning feel unfamiliar. Their skin hardened, darkening and lightening in places like something cooling and reheating, and when she touched them warmth spread into her hands, lingering longer than it should have. They watched her always, not in the unfocused way of animals, but with attention that followed her from room to room, and she felt seen in a way that made her both uneasy and comforted. At night she dreamed of fire and wings, though she had never seen either, and woke with her heart racing, certain that something enormous had passed overhead. The hatchlings learned her voice before they learned the house, responding to its sound, settling when she spoke, growing restless when she did not. One followed her more than the others, crawling after her with surprising strength, gripping fabric with small sharp claws that never broke skin, only pressed as if measuring. She began to talk to them, filling the silence with stories of nothing and everything, because it felt wrong to let them listen without offering something back. Sometimes she caught her reflection in the window holding one of them close, and the image startled her as if she were watching a version of herself she had never planned to become. She noticed the first burn mark on the floor one morning, a small dark circle warm to the touch, and she stared at it for a long time before covering it with a rug. She told herself there was an explanation for everything: growth, heat, stress, imagination, and yet each night before sleeping, she checked the doors and windows twice, not out of fear of them, but of the world discovering what was quietly growing inside her walls. The changes could no longer be hidden, even from herself, and the house began to bear the marks of what lived inside it. The hatchlings filled the rooms with sound, low vibrations that rattled glass and traveled through the floor into her bones, and she learned to feel their moods through her feet before she heard them. They tested their strength on everything: chair legs, walls, metal bowls, and each crack, splinter, and bend left her standing between fear and denial. When neighbors came by, they paused at the edge of the yard, listening to noises they could not place, and she smiled too quickly, offering excuses that even she did not believe. At night, the lights flickered when the hatchlings grew restless, and once the power cut out entirely, leaving her in darkness, lit only by the faint glow seeping from their scales. She should have been afraid then, but instead, she felt a rush of awe, sharp and breath-stealing, because she was witnessing something no one else had. The animals in the area vanished, first birds, then deer, then even insects, and the quiet outside grew heavy, pressing against the walls. One morning she found the fence scorched and bent inward as if something massive had leaned close, but the hatchlings slept peacefully, unaware of the warning written into the land. She began keeping them inside, more watching the road through the window, counting cars, praying no one stopped. Her sleep thinned, stretched tight by the knowledge that love was no longer enough to keep this small, contained world safe. Yet every time she considered letting someone else see them, one of the hatchlings would curl against her chest, warm and steady, and the thought would fall apart. Was no longer choosing what was right or wrong, only what she could live with. And somewhere beyond her land, the world continued, unaware that something ancient was learning patience. Beneath her roof, the hatchlings began to test her, not with malice, but with curiosity and growing confidence. They snapped at objects, breathed heat that warped metal and cracked stone, and once a wall crumbled beneath a careless movement, she corrected them every time, placing herself between their power and the damage, speaking firmly, refusing to step back. They listened. That was what unsettled her most. They learned restraint not because they were weak, but because she asked them to. And the choice settled deep inside them. When anger flared, they turned away from her. When hunger sharpened, they waited for her signal. She realized then that what she was teaching them was not survival but control, and control in creatures like these was more dangerous than instinct. They were becoming something that could choose, and the weight of that knowledge settled on her chest, heavier than fear. The dragons grow larger each day, their scales glinting in the fading sunlight as they stretch their wings against the walls of the cottage. One of them knocks over a chair and hisses at the sound of the wind rattling the windows. She rushes to calm it, her hands trembling, as she whispers soft words that seem to soothe their restless energy. Yet the fear in their eyes reflects a wildness she cannot tame. She watches as another leaps onto the table and swipes at her bowls with claws sharper than knives. The smallest one curls around her ankles, purring, yet sparks flare from its mouth when startled, and smoke curls. In the corners of the room she feels a thrill and terror, at the same time knowing they are no longer helpless but something entirely different. She tries to set boundaries, teaching them where they can crawl, where they can perch, and where they must stop. Yet The rules are tested constantly. They dart through the hallways, knocking over trinkets and knocking over books that spill across the floor. One escapes out the open door and she follows through the night forest, watching its glowing eyes dart between the trees. She calls to it, her voice breaking the silence, and it answers with a sound that vibrates through her chest, a growl that is both playful and commanding. The others follow her steps. Her heart races as she realizes the destruction they could bring if unleashed. She thinks of the villagers and the hunters and the scholars she has hidden them from, yet her loyalty to the creatures she raised is stronger than any fear she feels. She kneels beside the smallest one, tracing its scales, feeling warmth that burns and hums under her fingers. She whispers, not to frighten them, but to remind them of her presence. They respond with sudden nudges and gentle nudges, and then a flicker of flame dances harmlessly above the stone path. She laughs nervously at the danger and the wonder mixed in the same moment. She carries them back home through twisted roots and fallen leaves, feeling the forest press around her, aware that every shadow could be watching and every rustle could be a threat or an invitation. She locks the doors behind them and watches as they curl together in the dim light, their eyes reflecting hers in a mixture of trust and challenge. She wonders how long she can keep them contained. How long before their nature demands more than she can give. And as she stands in the silence, after their chaos, she feels both pride and dread, knowing that her small acts of love have created something magnificent and terrifying. And unstoppable hunters arrive at the edge of the forest, moving cautiously through the underbrush, their whispers sharp and urgent. She watches from the shadows, heart pounding, as they scan the trees and the glowing eyes that follow them silently. She gathers the dragons close, murmuring reassurances as their scales ripple and tails lash in nervous energy. The smallest hisses softly while the largest spreads its wings, almost brushing the ground, sending a gust that shakes leaves from the branches. She leads them deeper into the forest, weaving between trunks and over roots, careful not to leave tracks, yet every snap of a twig sends adrenaline racing through her veins. She hears the hunters curse and shuffle closer, and she thinks of the destruction the dragons could cause if frightened, but also of the danger if they are captured. She whispers to them to stay low, to hide, to trust her, and they respond with silent nods and flicks of their tails. She moves quickly over a fallen log, the forest damp and dark around her, their bodies brushing hers in familiar warmth, yet she senses the power growing within them. A flicker of flame ignites on the smallest one when a hunter draws near, and she sweeps it out with a hand, leaving only smoke and sparks. The hunters freeze for a heartbeat and then move again, unaware of what they almost glimpsed. She ducks behind a boulder, their breaths shallow and her heart pounding in sync with theirs. She guides them into a hidden hollow under a twisted root where the air hums with magic and safety. For a moment they all breathe quietly, watching the shadows move beyond the entrance. She strokes their scales, murmuring promises that they will survive, that she will keep them safe, and they nuzzle her in return. But the thrill of the hunt lingers in the air, and she knows that the danger has only just begun. She uncovers an ancient book hidden beneath the floorboards, its pages brittle and inscribed with symbols that seem to glow in the dim light. As she reads, she realizes the truth. The Hatchlings are descendants of a legendary line of dragons, feared for centuries, capable of fire and destruction beyond imagination. Her hands tremble as she traces the words, feeling the weight of what she has raised. She looks at the dragons curled around her and sees in their eyes the same power that once laid waste to kingdoms. She feels love and fear tangled together, knowing that the creatures she nurtured with gentle hands carry the legacy of devastation. One nudges her gently, and sparks flicker across its snout. She flinches and whispers that they are safe, but the words feel fragile against the reality of their lineage. She thinks of the villages, the hunters, the forests, and realizes that every day she has kept them hidden. She has walked on a knife edge between wonder and catastrophe. She paces the floor, tracing each scale with reverence and dread, imagining the chaos they could unleash if they grow beyond her control. Yet she cannot deny the bond she shares with them. She closes the book and looks into their eyes and sees trust and curiosity and a hunger for the world they have yet to understand. She knows she must teach them to balance their nature or risk losing everything. She kisses the smallest one and whispers that together they will find a way to live with the world without destroying it. But in the back of her mind the shadow of their power stretches long, and she wonders if love alone will ever be enough to contain what they are meant to become. She steps into the clearing with the dragons trailing behind her, their wings brushing the trees and scales glinting in the pale light. She feels the weight of their power pressing against the quiet forest, and knows that this moment will define them all. She spreads her arms and whispers that they must choose their path, and the dragons stir their eyes bright with curiosity, and fire the largest stretches its wings wide, and lets out a roar that shakes the leaves from the branches. Smaller sparks ignite around the others, and the air hums with energy. She feels fear and pride mingle as she walks among them, teaching them to control the flame, to temper the strength, to listen to her voice above their instincts. They respond with sudden obedience and gentle nudges, and she guides them to rise above the forest canopy, feeling the wind lift them effortlessly. She marvels at their beauty and danger. Together they soar, and she laughs, a sound carried away by the wind, knowing she has raised not monsters, but guardians that can walk between worlds without destroying them. The hunters below can only watch shadows and flickers of fire and whispering awe as the dragons glide above them. She feels the bond that began with fragile eggs, now transformed into something immense and unstoppable, and yet tempered by love. She folds her hands across the smallest one's head and whispers that they will always be safe, that they will always be hers, and the dragons answer with a chorus of growls and purrs and roars that fill the forest and sky, and she knows that their destiny and hers are forever entwined together in power, freedom, and wonder.